Konnichiwa, Ohio. Good morning. Let me first alert you. I took my time getting married, raising a family. I'm 92, going on 93. Okay, let me start first with Hawaii. I'm a Japanese American, born and raised in Hawaii. My grandparents came from Japan in the 1800s, both maternal and paternal, to work in the sugar plantation fields. My parents were born in Hawaii, so they're American citizens. Interestingly enough, the Japanese government allowed those who came to Hawaii to register their children as a Japanese citizen back in their old villages they came from. My grandparents did that to my father, so he was both an American citizen and a Japanese citizen. If you see the map, the Hawaiian Islands is a series of volcanic islands. The plate tectonic is moving from southeast to southwest. So if you look at a map, you see that the Hawaiian Islands are all lined up. The volcanic activity is still going on. The last one at the bottom, Island Hawaii, there's still volcanic activities, lava coming up, going into the sea, great tourist attraction, dangerous too. Excuse me. The original natives of Hawaii were Pacific Islanders. King Kamehameha was the last king. Some people from the New England, I think that they said there were some church-related people, came to Hawaii, deposed him, and took over the economy and the government of Hawaii. Interesting enough, and I have no idea why they did it, they started the economy of sugarcane fields, grazing sugarcane. The native Hawaiians, of course, were not farmers. They lived off what they can get off the ocean or what. They had to import workers from outside to tend the sugarcane fields. They started in China and imported laborers. Then they went to Japan. Interesting enough, they recruited people to come to Hawaii from southern Japan. Hiroshima, which is on the southern end of the main island, Yamaguchi, Kyushu. My paternal and maternal grandparents came from Hiroshima, farmlands just outside the city of Hiroshima. My parents, of course, were born in Hawaii on the plantation villages. And somewhere along the line, they got married. So that when I was born, they were already living in Honolulu, running a mom and pop grocery store. I was a 12-year-old, sixth grader when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, starting the war between Japan and the United States. We went to Sunday school. The teacher didn't appear. We sat there. Teacher came in and said, "Go on home." Well, we started going home. Planes were flying overhead and terror camps were going up. But they were doing a lot of military exercises, so we thought this was just exercise. Took our time, watched what was going on. Finally got home. Because my parents were frantic, saying, "Where were you?" war is going on. Japan is attacking Pearl Harbor. So that's my introduction to World War II. When Japan and the United States went to war, the two groups of people, the military as well as the political leaders on the west coast of the United States were frantic. They were convinced that Japan was going to invade the United States and the Japanese Americans would help the Japanese. Never happened. They petitioned President Roosevelt to sign an executive order evacuating all the people from the West Coast into internment centers. It was completely illegal, no due process. It was just an executive order signed by President Roosevelt. He must have had a terrible, terrible political and pressure. He signed it. Eleanor Roosevelt, of course, was completely opposed to that. Of course, as the First Lady, she can't politically do anything. Only recently it became clear that she was so upset that she visited some of the internment centers, did what she could do to help the interned people either move out or ease their way of life. I always admired her, but it raised my estimation of her greatly when I read the article. Okay, so when President Roosevelt signed the executive order, they immediately started building internment centers a little further inland, Utah, Wyoming, Colorado, so forth and so on. They realized that what they were doing was not constitutional, legally right. They kept the thing quiet. They spread the falsehood. They were protecting the Japanese Americans on the West Coast. They put most of the legal papers into the archives and did not make it available to the public. The Japanese Americans were the largest immigrants to Hawaii. They were the ones that were working in military state activities, illegal business. They could not be removed from Hawaii. The economy was completely collapsed. So all they removed were the people on the West Coast, Oregon, Washington, California, and parts of Arizona, into internment centers in the center. They spread the, what shall I say, falsehood that they were protecting the Japanese Americans. When the interns were finally, when the centers were built, and when they were ordered to get rid of the business, pack what you can, and they were all shipped to the internment centers. When people arrived there, what they found were 15-foot high barbed wire fences with barbed wires facing inwards, guard towers all around, manned by soldiers, machine guns, and rifles. Clearly, it was not protection. It was to keep the Japanese Americans from ever escaping. Interestingly enough, the Japanese Americans have a saying, shikataganai. I mean, you all Japanese, translated, he said, it can't be helped. But my father, as I said, was a dual citizen, spent 2 years in the Japanese army. The government issued an order to for people who spent any time in the military, Japanese military, reported. My father, being an obedient citizen, reported it. They immediately grabbed him and interned him. So we were separated. My parents upset, and it was not healthy or good to be separated. But when they inquired, the only option we had was to voluntarily be sent from Hawaii into the internment centers so we can come back together. Well, they did that. So we were one of the few families in Hawaii that spent the 4 years in the relocation centers. First in Utah, and finally, whatever ended in California. To ease the life, there are no rioting, no attacks. There may be some mentally unbalanced people that tried to climb the fence. They were immediately shot by the soldiers in the room. And not too surprisingly, many of them started moving out. You could go out of the relocation centers, but you had to go east, Central or east. And then this helped to move the Japanese Americans from the West Coast to all of the United States. But we survived. It was not a pleasant experience, but we survived. Any questions?
How did Uncle get out of the camps? Yeah.
My brother, being as bright as he is and perceptive, very quickly saw that the Japan was reaching too high. He told my parents, Japan is going to lose the war. There's nothing to be gained by staying in relocation centers. The Quakers were very active, sympathetic to the interned people. They spent teachers and helpers helping people adjust and help people move to the eastern United States. Of course, my father couldn't accept that. There were great conflict. And finally, he approached the Quaker family and got their help. This is a family from WW2, Illinois, and left the center and went to live with them. He was still in high school then. My parents were furious and they disowned him. The Japanese have the word for kondo. You are no longer a child. And so that's the way things went with him. He was such a brilliant student. He graduated honors at WW2 High School, went to Northwestern University on scholarship, and then went to University of Michigan as a graduate school, working for a PhD. And that's where he was when I finished college, got into the military, went to Germany instead of Korea after basic training, and came back to Ann Arbor.
Which camps were our family in?
We first went to Delta in central Utah, out in the desert. And I never realized that central Utah, is subject, especially during the warm, to dust storms. We were in a barracks, not very well constructed. The dust would come in. I remember having a terrible time, irritating my eyes. Not that I have very fond memories of Utah. California was all right, but...
Okay, so after Topaz, what happened to us then?
The government asked the adults to declare loyalty to the United States or loyalty to Japan.
The two most controversial and difficult to answer questions for many people were 27 and 28. 27 asked internees, or if you will, prisoners, if they would be willing to serve in the military. If you were older than 17, you had to answer this survey. So Dad didn't, because Dad would have been too young, and his older brother would have already left the camps and come to Illinois. A lot of the Issei, and I believe I told you yesterday or the day before, that Issei couldn't get citizenship. So, and by that point, my grandfather would have already been too old to serve in the military anyway. And he was quite angry about how our family was being treated. He answered no to that one, and he answered no to question 28. What that meant was that he would have to give up his dual citizenship. And although grandfather was Nisei and he had United States citizenship, he didn't feel that citizens of the United States should be treated this way. So grandfather was a no-no, right? He answered no to, if you answered no to both questions, you were called no-no. The no-no people were then sent to a different camp called Tule Lake. And Tule Lake is in
just north of
northern California.
Just south of California.
And it was where all of the people who answered no or were otherwise thought to be dangerous or disloyal were sent. It was that time that my grandfather asked for the family to be sent back to Japan. And in fact, kind of a little known fact about this time, that the government would send back people to Japan who had never been to Japan in their lives anyway. But if you answered no to both these questions, you were kind of put in line to be shipped out almost like a prisoner of war. And that's the status our family was in when, thank God, the war ended. Did you start any new hobbies while you were in the camps?
I do remember, the other adults going to the central area to pick up scrap wood, and they make guitar, the wooden sandals that Japanese wear. Very, very, I remember watching these people. I can't imagine how much time it takes to learn to do it, but boy, they're very skillful in making these things. All people would paint, they would do some sewing. Yeah, gamang. Oh yes, that's basic. He has a great library. You people should look at it.
You talk about how people made crafts out of scrap wood or whatever they could find. Because these camps, these prisons, were built on the fly and built under a government program, and they were being built for people that nobody really cared about. You have to understand the kind of the national mood of the time. I mean, Japanese Americans were less than 1% of the total population of the nation. They were people nobody cared about and wanted to get rid of. So they used the cheapest materials that they could find to make these places. And very often, when people arrived at these camps that looked like, you might have seen this one, but the places themselves. So each one of these windows is about as much space as a family would have had. And a lot of these places had holes in them or they were unfinished. A lot of the prisoners actually kind of had to finish building their own homes. And so the scrap and whatnot, Dad was talking about making geta. And some of the older people who might have had carpentry skills, or he talks about they tried to settle in and pass the time as constructively as they could. This book called The Art of Gaman, we talked about Gaman the other day, is full of the kind of things that people made during the time. But you read a lot about people, picking up a piece of scrap, like baseball bats were confiscated because they could be weapons. So the boys who brought their baseball bat to camp with them couldn't use it. So they would pick up a piece of scrap lumber as their bat, and they used rocks as balls. And baseball in the camps was a big thing. There's a lot of stories about baseball in Japanese America. How were the internees treated while they were in the camps?
Well, not the they were called blocks, barracks, with a central bathroom and a dining room. We pretty much spent the time just daily life, going to the bathroom. The most social activity was in the main dining room where we all met for the 3 meals. The meals were prepared by the internees who were qualified as cooks. It was also the place where lots of discussions took over. I remember, especially when the yes-no things were going on, people divided yes, no, and shouting at each other. We children just sat back and wondered, why they're so upset. But that was basically how things were.
In 1988, Ronald Reagan signed the Civil Liberties Act, which gave reparations of $20,000 to surviving families.